Hello, everyone. This is Jessica Pettit, and who do I have the pleasure of interviewing today?
Hi, my name is Chris Haigh. I use they, them, their pronouns, and I run a consulting company called True Change Associates based in Boston, Massachusetts.
Excellent. And Chris and I like to make this disclosure, is that I'm not always really good friends with everyone I interview, but the vast majority of them because they're the only people who will return my phone calls. So thank you, Chris, for one, being my friend, reconnecting, and doing such amazing work. I'm so excited to have you as part of this series. Can I start off with some two kind of big concept questions? There's no wrong answers, and I cannot wait to hear how these things land in your world.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, I know, no pressure.
Am I ready? I don't know.
No, okay, but we'll see. I think you're ready. They're not that scary. So the first kind of concept that's been rolling around is the concept of diversity dividend. And for me, this seems to come up when I work with larger organizations that want to know what the return on investment is of doing diversity work. And there is some validity to the question as much as the question is annoying. So when I say diversity dividend to you, thinking about investment, action, and return, what does that mean for you? How does that show up in your work? What's your response?
I'm going to be totally transparent and say my first response is I want to do an eye roll.
Yeah. Okay. But can you talk about why? Because I think this is an important piece.
Yeah. No, I think it's important to understand the value of it, but I also feel like we keep coming up with these buzzwords and these languages and sort of, these things that kind of try to make it sexy. It kind of drives me crazy. And I think we're wandering away from the foundation and the essence of what we're trying to do here, right? And so I think that, on one hand, if your eyes aren't open, how can you miss the fact that diverse, inclusive, and equitable work environments affect your bottom line? I feel like you can't miss that fact. There is just so much out there, that there's so much data out there that you can't not see it at this point, that it's affecting your bottom line. So I think that, we still have to have that conversation. We still have to get to the people have to understand why we're doing the work. But there's also, it's not just about figures and facts and numbers and profits. There's also a moral imperative to this work. Mm-hmm. And so I always talk about the head and the heart. And I do understand that for some people, we have to get their head in the game first. But I feel like you also can't do the work unless you're bringing your heart into this too. So I guess, the eye roll is I'm sort of like, I feel like we sort of have all these the language, so I started doing this work, gosh, over 20 years ago, when the language DEI didn't exist, mm-hmm. right? And so you're saying, remember it was like pluralism and multiculturalism and all this stuff, and it's constantly evolving. And so DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is the latest. And then people are throwing belonging now in there, which is a cool concept. But and for me, it's less about and I say this in trainings too, it's less about the language. I want you to understand the concepts, because what we're doing is we're taking all these languages, these words, and we're speaking different languages at the same organization, but our conversations are going like this because we don't understand the concepts. And so if you understand what diversity is, period, which is our difference, right? Diversity is the presence of difference. It's seen, it's unseen, it's known, it's unknown. It's it's all of us, and it's the combination of all of our identities. And so we need to create a work environment that honors that. But then, so the inclusion piece is, but whose voices are heard and whose experiences are valued, right? And so we can all say that we want that, we want a diverse group of people, and we want everybody's voices valued. But we're not there yet. We still value and privilege certain perspectives and identities, and then equity gets to the piece around access to resources and opportunity, and in the O word, oppression, right? And sort of how different people access it differently. So if you can understand those pieces, then you can see how it all comes into your workplace, comes into your organization, into your school, right? Because all of our voices have not been valued the same, have not had the same, same equal value behind it. So diversity dividend, I struggle with it because again, I feel like so much is out there, especially in the past maybe 8 to 10 years or so, where the research is there that says if you have, well, actually, the soundbite is diverse teams equal more innovation.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the reality. It's diverse plus inclusive teams equal more innovation. But I feel like we grab at that soundbite, right? And so, okay, so we have to hire more people of more identities, hire. And yeah, we've got it. And so dividends feels like a number. It feels like, it doesn't feel like the whole piece, the whole picture. But if you truly want to create an inclusive work environment, I want to get back past that. I want your head and your heart there.
Right.
Because if you are a leader, you understand that people need to be their best selves to show up at work, and you cannot put diversity and equity and inclusion over here if you're thinking about people being their best selves at work.
Yeah, and I think that the over here piece, so, I spend a lot of time talking about, like, I call it the Ghostbusters move, where, like, in the very first movie where Annie Potts is an important movie in my life, where Annie Potts like slams down on the button and says, "We've got one," because they got their first customer. Like, that's how most organizations do diversity, right? Is like, we got one. And that you have to be able to have one, host one, if you're only going to have one, and think about retention, incorporating folks in, and the DEI isn't a subcommittee of people who that's their problem. This has to be completely embedded in order for to use the language, the return to happen. Most people aren't willing to do the actual investment to actually create an inclusive workplace. Thank you for saying that. The other open-ended question idea that is rolling around in my brain is kind of the flip side of this, and it's asterisks other duties assigned. So, sometimes this is like the last line of a job description. It's a catch-all. And in doing some of these interviews, it also speaks to things that you may be willing to take on to try to carve out a place for your own sense of belonging. So you take on these extra pieces based on your identities or your experiences. What does other duties assigned mean to you?
Well, it's interesting when you said, we carve out these pieces. Like, so often the work in organizations falls onto the shoulders of those who have been marginalized. And so I think there's an asterisk, other duties is assigned, asterisk, depending on your identity, right? So if you're not feeling that inclusive, equitable culture and you're passionate about it, it tends to fall to you, or it's assumed to fall to you, right? And so, but it doesn't have to be. And so other duties as assigned has to apply to absolutely everybody, right? And so, white people, I'm talking to you because I'm one of you, right? It's our duty as well. It's to think about race and racism, and not just the experience of people in our community who are folks of color. We have to think about the whiteness in our culture that excludes, right? That privileges voices. Men, you're a part of diversity, right? And so this whole conversation around like Me Too and that type of stuff, like it's a woman's thing. Well, no, it's not, right? It's an everybody thing. And so we have to have the conversation that is not just put on the backs of those who have been marginalized, but it's like those of us with privilege. And not to mention the intersectionality of all of our identities, right? And so we have to see this as an everybody thing. But back to the previous conversation around diversity dividend, right? We've created a number thing, and we've created another thing. And so in a lot of people's mindsets, they're not connected to it, right? And so diversity has often been about numbers. And when we specifically mean numbers, we mean folks of color, we mean women, LGBT, right? Like I had a client once contact me and say they want to hire diversity. That was the phrase, hire diversity. And so I was like, what do you mean by that? And they're like, hire diversity. And I was like, nope, tell me what you mean by that. And they couldn't say it. What they really wanted to say was that they wanted more folks of color. But the thing is, we've got this sort of binary where we say diversity and then we say, oh, white folks or men, right? Sort of, and that's the dominant. That's when we go to inclusion, those are the perspectives that are heard, right? And then equity too, which is a whole nother conversation. But so I think, anyway, so we've created this culture around thinking when we say diversity, who do we mean? But we all have to see ourselves in that conversation.
Right.
And the other thing too, I mean, let's be realistic, is that we don't grow up in very U.S. centered, I'm going to say. We don't grow up in a culture where we have these conversations, where we have the skills to have these conversations. And so when we think about sort of other duties as assigned and sort of throwing them to the people we think, it's those people, it's every one of us, but also let's take a pause and have some grace with all of ourselves to say that there's fear behind that. There's unknown behind that. There's we don't know how to have these conversations. And so I think, thinking about building our skills, and there's all these more buzzwords out there, right? Cultural competence, cultural humility, all that kind of stuff. But it is all about skill-based. How do you lean into conversations about difference? How do you not shut down? How do you hold on to the fear that you're feeling, especially those of privileged identities, right? Sort of, how do we lean into that space of discomfort around that? And so, and I say exactly what you said before, sort of the DEI, you can have all these organizations with these amazing visions and missions, and their DEI work is over here. It's separate. We got to put it here. And so we have to change our mind frame to see that it is a thread throughout everything we do.
It's a good segue to also just your approach and the work that you do. So I know we talked briefly, and I want to hear more about the work you do around social justice foundations, but also how you are threading an intersection of different identities, right? But how you're threading around the responsibility and the working with your own identities, and how that shows up in your work around whiteness and class and gender fluidity and doing the great work that you are doing. Do you mind sharing a little bit about it?
Wow, I feel like there's 12 questions in that one question.
I know. This is how I interview. I interview by word cloud.
I don't know where to start with that.
You take whatever you want and get what you know.
One thing I guess I want to share, which kind of connects to the last conversation and a little bit of this, it's around sort of values and priorities, right? And so, I definitely have heard from organizations that, sort of we value it, but it can't be a priority type of thing, which sort of, because we have to make our product, or we have to.
We'll take the murals, but we're not doing the conversation.
Exactly, right? And so a good friend of mine who also does this work, who you also know, Tanya Williams. Mm-hmm. So I was once with her, and sort of she was describing to a client, and I love this, so I totally have stolen it from her, but she lets me, it's she basically describes to people that every organization, every school has a technology plan. Right? And it's something that because technology is always changing. We always have to be there. So if a company wants to provide their best for their customers and their workforce, they have to constantly make sure they have the best technology so they can do the best innovation. So we put tons of money into it. Colleges and universities have these 4 or 5 year plans where they always are turning over their technology. And so there's so much money there, and there's so much thought process by it. It's always a part of people's strategic plan and vision to have the latest and the greatest, right? And so right there, you're saying you value technology. And so why can't we think of DEI as the same thing, right? In a sense that it's constantly evolving and changing, right? There's new language today that wasn't there before. There's the explosion of identities, especially around gender fluidity, multiracial births have outnumbered white births, so that's going to change the conversation around race, right? So all this stuff is constantly happening. And so how can we make it the same value that we're always going to invest, we're always going to have the conversations, we're always going to see how it works? And so I love that sort of analogy, because business folks usually get that sort of, oh yeah, technology is important, but we need to sort of have DEI there too. So I changed that to sort of thinking about it a value-based perspective. But then I'm trying to make the segue to where I want to go next, but this is hard. So I'm going to name that this is a tough segue.
Yeah, first off, it doesn't have to be a smooth segue. We can always edit. And number two, I just want you to be able to showcase what you do in your work.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
This does not have to be a one cut, one take thing. It's no big deal. I also have to blow my nose. So here, you do some thinking and I'll blow my nose.
I feel like we should play some music
It's one of those things I'm like, can I make it to the end of the interview? Nope.
Yeah, I love it. But I also love this transparency. It kind of makes it more fun. But so back to what you said, like, so for me, and I think this is what, one of my things that I bring as a DEI consulting is understanding the foundations, right? Social justice foundations, right? And so what I mean by that is, if you really want to understand race dynamics today, we need to go back to 1492, right? And I mean, we really need to understand the history in the US, and not just race, like gender, sexual orientation. We have to understand the history. 400, 500 years of history has created the inequities we see today, right? There's a reason why that sort of like certain identities are privileged, or certain ways of thinking and experiences are privileged over others, right? We have to understand that through law, through policy, through culture, through science. We established what it means in this country to be white, and we've established what it means in this country to be a person of color. We've established what it means to be straight, what it means to be gay. We created the class system, the fact that the vast majority of America lives racially segregated. We created that through housing policy, all that kind of stuff, right? And so when you think about, 400 or 500 years of history and access to resources, there's a reason why, the average white family has so much more wealth than the average Black family because of access to resources, right? So you have to understand that, which I think is so important, because the easy way out is, they're just not working hard enough. They're just not trying hard enough. I mean, we need to get past that. So for me, it's super important. For so many people, I'm sure you see this too, people want to stay on the individual level, but my best friend is Black, my best friend is gay, why can't we all get along? Why are you bringing up difference? That type of stuff. And I do think it's super important on an individual level that we have to be comfortable having conversations and working across difference, people that are different from us in multiple ways. But that doesn't change anything, right? It may change our little sphere, but when we think we have to go beyond, when I say go beyond the individual, it's really important for me to get to the institutional and the ideological level. And so the institutional is that systemic level, like you heard, systemic oppression. There's a reason why, from a society, historical, political perspective, that we created these inequalities. So I want to teach about that, right? And obviously it's hard to do in a workshop, but you can do little pieces of it and help people really work their critical consciousness for understanding, like, for example, women in leadership, right? The Fortune 500 CEOs are at 4%. Of 500. I think it's around 4%. When women within the gender binary make up 51% of the population. And so, a lot of people say, well, they don't want that position. They're not good leaders. They're not trying hard, all that kind of stuff. Again, we have to go back to access, and sort of our whole corporate and government structure was made by men and white men. And this is not a bash against white men, but it's to understand that our whole structure was made by that. And ideologically, we had a view of what women could and could not do. Just a generation ago, my mom was like, I could only be a teacher or a nurse or a secretary, right? That's not that long ago. And we still have some of that ideology. And so when people are surprised that women are not at par in leadership roles, we have to understand why we created access differently. And we create an ideological system. So anyway, all that is to say, so my work is really trying to understand from a critical lens, from a critical thinking perspective, when we see these disparities, we have to understand the why in order to fix it. So back to DEI, we can embrace women in the workforce, we can embrace people of color. Okay, but are we getting all voices and experiences valued? And are we examining our culture from a systemic oppression lens? So that's going to change stuff. So that's important to me, in doing all that work. And then, of course, I think also in your question was sort of my identities and sort of how I show up in that. And that's complicated, right? Like I say, I will unpack my whiteness for the rest of my life, which I think that's so true, right? It's so much in our culture. But I think what I try to really do as a facilitator is really illustrate how marginalization and privilege can intersect, right? Mm-hmm. And so, okay, like, for example, I'm a member of the queer community, right? I identify as gender fluid, gender queer, and I've got stories about what that experience is like. I could tell you, TSA and I are not friends when it comes to gender. I've had so many experiences with that were degrading, demoralizing, just on and on and on and on and on. But I can also talk about how, despite that, my whiteness has still benefited me, mm-hmm. right? I still have gotten places further because of my whiteness. And within the queer community, in terms of intersectionality, right? So being able to talk and educate how that plays out, and that actually from an LGBT rights movement, the people that have been most benefited are white, middle, and upper class cisgender folks. Mm-hmm. Have I benefited from that? Yes, absolutely. But what a lot of people don't realize out there is the extreme homelessness, poverty, murder, all those type of rates, and folks of color at a higher level at all of that stuff. And so being able to use my identities for people to see that this is complex, that this is not siloed work, that our identities play off of each other, and every single one of us has a role in doing that. And so for me, when people ask me to come in, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think that is also like one of your true gifts in doing this work, right? Is that when I can ask you a really complicated question, because I know what the work you do is you keep things at the complex. So some people, I think, will say like, ooh, this is very complicated. Let's just talk about this one little piece because this is too complicated. And there's value in understanding that one little piece. And what I have valued about our friendship and the conversations we have had, even though there's not enough of them, is that you are able to hold things in their full complexity while examining each one individually and how they touch and bump and rub against each other, and also float apart and contradict one another in a way that I find really beautiful, that to me is foundational to doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. It's never going to be alphabetized.
No.
I just, you live it and you hold those spaces, which I think is just brilliant.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, because I feel, and I say this too, like if equity work were easy, we'd be there. You know what I mean? Like, and so, and life is hard, that's just identity work. And so we got to get rid of this like simple answer thing. And we have to get rid of this, I need to know it all, I need to fix it thing. But we just have to show up and be in that mess. And being in the mess is part of the solution. Right. And just, so thank you for that. I really appreciate what you just said.
Yeah, absolutely. Awkward segue number 2 is, are you interested in me asking you my 2 favoriteest questions ever?
Oh my gosh. Yes. If they're your favorite, then I got to hear them.
2 favorite questions. So number 1 is, what have you changed your mind about lately?
You have to say that again. You just cut out.
No worries. What have you changed your mind about lately?
Oh, lately. Game of Thrones.
Oh, good. Tell me more.
I'm sorry. So you said lately, and that's the first thing that came to mind.
I also appreciate having some humor. Almost everybody is like super serious, and I'm like, geez whiz.
I could totally give you the serious answers as well, but
I don't want the serious answers necessarily. I want to know, what have you changed your mind about this Game of Thrones thing?
Well, so let's first of all talk about it as sort of that, what's like guilty obsession, right? And sort of like, even though it is like the most violent, like, there's so many things, like from a social justice lens, that you could pick apart that show, but it has become escapist for me. And so I watched the last 7 seasons relatively recently. And so I just finished the last season, and I was kind of like, this sucks. And I understand there's all this stuff on social media about people hating it. And so I was just like, they mailed it in. Like, I was just so upset. But then I had this conversation with a colleague who was like, you know what? Here's how I think what happened. I think that they have been working so hard on this production, which has been some of the biggest productions ever. And he's, I get the sense that crew, that they're just tired and they just want it to end. And so I get that. And I was like, people. Like, you're right. There's people behind this like production. And so I was like, so I went from being like, you all suck to, okay.
That's awesome.
So silly, but it is what it is. And I think it goes back to the bigger picture of everything has a story. And so how do we create a space to find that and not jump off the deep end with our thoughts and our anger and our assumptions? Game of Thrones.
Well, I think it's a perfect example. And if you are interested, my escapist television currently is called Nailed It. And it is bad bakers competing in a baking game show.
Oh my gosh. I think I need to check this out.
Yeah, there's no dragons or fire, murder, rape, any of that stuff. It's just poorly executed desserts.
Okay.
Nailed it. You're welcome.
Nailed it.
Okay, the next one is, what do you absolutely know?
Wow. That's a deep one. I absolutely know that I don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I also absolutely know that if you are, what's the word I'm looking for? If you're in line and sort of with what you are passionate about, like truly you, not what people tell you, you should be doing, I am confident and know that the universe helps you along that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so if you are connected to what you're supposed, I don't know if I want to say what we're supposed to be doing, but if you find what's within you that resonates, that's deep, that's you, that calls you, no matter what anybody says, if that is true, I feel like the universe works with you to sort of follow that path.
There's a congruency there that I think works.
Yes, that's the word, congruency, yeah.
Nice. That's wonderful. Okay, lightning round.
Oh, geez. Okay.
So there's 3 numbers that you gave me. So 8, 22, and 28. So I have these icebreaker cards that have 50 questions divided up into easy, intermediate, more like deeper questions. So I'm going to give you your question and you have to answer as quickly as possible. This is very hard because it's not thinky. It's you don't get a lot of thinking time, but they're not always just silly questions because I wrote them and I'm not a very silly person.
I know.
People think I'm a silly person, but they're wrong. Okay, so first, number 8. What is the best gift that you have received from someone? What about the best gift that you've given to someone else?
Wow. Okay, the very first thing that comes to mind is the gift of love and patience that my wife has given me. Like, I feel unbelievably blessed to have found her and her to just be so there for me and open and gift and love and stuff like that. And so I think I'd have to say giving that back, so, and I know that this sort of sounds cheesy, but I am constantly amazed how we've been together 13 years and how it still deepens and grows and how what a partnership we are truly in life. And so I don't think of gifts as the important gifts are not tangible. And I think being able to show up for each other, fully understand each other, have conflict sometimes when we're doing that, but know that we're going to figure that out because I'm there for her to be fully actualized in this world, and she gives that to me as well. And so I think that's the first thing that comes to mind is the gifts we give to each other.
That is a beautiful answer.
I'm gonna have to tell my wife that one.
Yeah, show her the recording. So number 2 is intermediate. What is something that has happened in your life that has defined who you are?
I would have to say coming out when I was 21, and so that was in the early 1990s. There was no internet. There was no there was I was on an island by myself, so there was no community. And my parents still are Roman Catholic, and we had an incredible falling out over it. I'm happy to say, though, fast forward to 10 years, they came back into my life. But I name that because there was so much loss in my life between friends and family and stuff like that. But little did I know that is what set me on my professional journey. It was like, but it came, it's funny, I used to joke that I went into the work out of anger because I was so pissed off that this, can happen to people. And I think over the years, I've grown into doing the work out of love and out of grace, because that's what we need to have these conversations. And so that was probably, as far as professionally, the biggest moment in my life. And realizing that this is the work I want to do, and sort of creating spaces to get over, this misinformation and misunderstanding, and really sort of tackle systemic oppression, and not just from a queer lens, right? Because that was just opening the door to make me see all these other things that happened. So it was trauma. It was definitely a dark time in my life, but I am the professional I am today because that was the seed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's awesome. All right. Now I'm thinking about different kinds of things. Focus, Jessica. Okay. Number 28, also intermediate. Share a single regret you have. And if you could, what would you do differently now?
Oh my goodness. That's a tough one, because I think I've gotten to a place spiritually where, and trust me, I could not have said this, 10 years ago, where I'm just so open, and I can't think of any regrets in the recent years. Things might not have worked out as I wanted to, but I don't want to have regrets. So I can't. Nothing's coming to mind. And I'm going to think of one when we hang up on this call, and it's good.
That's okay. We'll do like a PS. P.S. Chris is actually a normal person and regrets taking that last piece of pie.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, so something like that maybe, but yeah. But I can't think of one, and I know they're there, but it's just not. I can't access it.
That's cool. Yeah. If people wanted to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Well, they can email me at chris@truechangeassociates.com. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook, but I'm going to be honest, I'm not on it that often. LinkedIn as well, I'm on, and I check that a little bit, but email's kind of the best. Or if you go to my website, my phone number's on there. We can have an old-fashioned conversation.
Yeah. There's a generational cut, I think, here, that I was having a conversation the other day with someone, and I was like, well, here's my phone number and my email. And they're like, yeah, but what's your Insta? And I'm like, first off, if I have login information for an Instagram account, and if you want to see what I ate 9 months ago, that's where I would go. But I would like to talk with you.
Yeah.
Here is actually how to make that happen.
And especially the work that we do, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, and I get it. I need to be more social media presence and stuff like that. I get the value of it, but if we want to work together, I want to have a conversation. I want to know what's up. I want to know what you're looking for. I want to tell you about me. Because we have to see, especially with the work thing, it's got to be a good match, because your whole purpose of these podcasts, there are so many people doing this work. And so I believe that if you're going to do it right at your organization, you need the right match for what you need.
Right. Absolutely.
I want to have that conversation.
And don't leave Gen Xers out of the generational conversation. We created Nirvana and Pearl Jam. We're already upset. Don't forget us.
Awesome. Love that.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And we should just connect more often, because we just should.
I agree.
All right. Yeah. Thanks.